Well, that was not what the Cleveland Browns had hoped for when they made a trip to Houston here this weekend to open the playoffs. 45-14 in a game the Browns led 14-10. Ouch. Brendan Gulick and Anthony Moeglin with you on Browns Digest. We've certainly enjoyed being with you all season, and hope you've enjoyed our coverage. I'm afraid we don't have too many positive things to say this afternoon because that was about as disappointing as it could have been all the way around. It wasn't a pathetic performance. It wasn't a terrible effort. As Kevin Stefanski and Joe Flacco and Myles Garrett all said post-game, they picked a bad day to have a bad day, and it was just not good enough all the way around. Amplified by a couple of pick sixes that maybe made the score look a little bit like a wider margin. It wasn't like the Browns were never in it in the second half, but from basically the middle of the third quarter on, it just looked like it wasn't going to happen, and then the avalanche couldn't be stopped. Anthony, it was a pretty darn disappointing ending to a great season, but nobody really wants to talk about the good season at this point because this leaves a pretty sour taste in your mouth.
Yeah, right. What a day to have a bad day, man. That was so disappointing. And, it just, like you said, it wasn't a bad performance. They didn't come out flat. None of that. It just snowballed so fast. Like back-to-back pick sixes is not how you draw it up, man. That was tough. And it's just a tough way to go out. It's a disappointing way to go out, honestly, because like you said, right now, nobody wants to talk about the good things. And this year was full of good things, and we'll get to them in later dates. But for tonight, man, that was just – it was a disappointing effort from the defense, which was the most shocking part. And the offense was trying to hang around for as long as they could, but as the chips fell, man, they just did not have enough. And as you can see, 45-14 shows that they just did not have enough firepower today.
I mean, look, I think, for folks that were thinking, hey, this was 36-22 a few weeks ago, feeling really good about the vibes and being in the playoffs and just drinking the Kool-Aid, we got this kind of thing. You just sort of expected you'd roll in here and that it would be a similar situation. I do think the Browns had the best unit on paper and proven through 17 games that their defense was the best unit, offense, defense, special teams between Houston and Cleveland. But today wasn't even close to being good enough. And I heard Peter King say this from NBC with a few minutes left to go in the game. This was sort of his unofficial stat. But he said that he counted at least 5 times where a Houston Texan caught a pass without a Cleveland Brown within 5 yards of that receiver. And I thought Houston did an unbelievable job scheming up today what C.J. Stroud could do well. You could talk more about that. You're the quarterback between the two of us. But, I mean, C.J. looked like he was just in such rhythm all game. It didn't matter if he was in the pocket or on the move. The defensive players' eyes were all over the place. He threw it deep. He threw it short. CJ was unflappable.
I'll tell you what, he's great, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but he didn't have to do anything special today, right? I think the hat goes off to Bobby Slowick, their offensive coordinator. There was many times where the Houston Texans just totally schemed up the Browns, right? They're going to come out and play man-to-man coverage. We're going to do a couple things. The Browns secondary struggles tackling, right? That came out to bear, that bared fruit today. There's a couple big plays that were results of poor tackling. And, it was C.J. Stroud just doing what he needed to do, doing his job. He didn't have to be incredible. I think the one incredible play he did have was finding Nico Collins right up the seam in that first drive for their first touchdown or their first field goal, excuse me. They didn't end up punching it in. And that was when you're like, okay, Browns could do something. But he stood in the pocket, took a hit from JOK and delivered a good ball. But other than that, dudes were running wide open because they were schemed wide open, and they had a great plan. And my hat, personally goes off to Bobby Slowick. I think the Houston Texans offense was well prepared going into this game and had a great plan, and they executed to perfection.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think if you're objective about the way the game was played and, plan going in, I didn't think the Browns were unprepared. I thought they handled some of the punch and counter punch, that you got early in the game, but Houston just didn't flinch, and C.J. Stroud certainly, was the leader in that regard. Let's talk Joe Flacco for a second. Final numbers, 34-46, 307, a touchdown on the shovel pass, and 2 interceptions, both of which were returned for touchdowns. Quarterback rating of 80.6. You see a guy throw for 300 yards in the playoffs, and on a day where it felt like Cleveland could only move the ball through the air, those numbers aren't terrible. but they were bad in the wrong ways, right? You can't have interceptions returned for touchdowns. Obviously, the second interception was particularly bad. I think Cleveland had a lot of fun with Joe Flacco these last couple of months. And in my opinion, Joe certainly proved that he's not going to start next year sitting on his couch at home because nobody's going to call him and see if he can still do it. But part of the problem Cleveland ran into all season long, whether it was Joe or anybody else, they led the NFL in giveaways, pretty banged up as the season moved along. And I think ultimately today it just kind of all snowballed in those specific aspects, and they couldn't overcome it.
You want to break it down and even get even more minute than that, right? The Browns were trailing by 10 points. Two-score game. They were across the 50-yard line going into score, and Joe Flacco kind of got hung up with a guy on his back trying to throw it away. He talked about it in his post-game presser. He should have just thrown it at the feet of the guy in front of Elijah Moore. He was trying to get out of bounds, was unable to do so. The result, an 82-yard interception return that goes from, let's pretend they get 3 more yards or 10 more yards and kick a field goal. It goes from a 1-score game to a 3-score game. And that was kind of the coffin, right? That was the nail in the coffin. And they come back the next drive, throw that pick six. My numbers I'm 95% sure they're right, but Browns will finish the year with 39 giveaways, which is insane. Insane. That's 2.5 a game, right? It's just you're not winning.
How'd they even win 11 games?
How do you win 11 games with 5 quarterbacks, 39 giveaways? It's just like, how do you even do that? And, we kept saying it all year long, don't turn it over. Well, they were able to get away with it against the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Chicago Bears and, some other teams in there. But in the playoffs, when you're facing one of the 14 best teams left in the NFL, you turn the ball over, you lose the football game. And that's just as simple as it gets. And they did it today, and it came back to bite them in the worst way.
I have to think Joe Flacco is not going to be back with the Browns next year. You never really rule anything out, but I think it is extremely unlikely that he's back in Cleveland. And for everybody that wants to have this Watson versus Flacco debate, I just don't think that's even reasonable unless something unforeseen and drastic changes. You've got a quarterback on your roster that you owe $68 million to each of the next 3 years. And you've got Joe Flacco, who is about to turn 39 years old and could certainly still play, but he's probably going to command a dollar amount that you're not going to pay a backup quarterback to, considering what you're giving your starting quarterback. And when Deshaun's healthy, I know we've seen some ups and downs from him. I don't want this to be a Deshaun Watson focused show. You're committed to that guy. You paid a lot of money to him. And so you got to find a way to make it work. Yeah. And I think maybe this team will find out that they grew a lot through some unbelievable adversity this year. And this is going to sting, but I don't think there's no quarterback controversy here. In my opinion, Deshaun Watson's going to be your quarterback next year. And so it's a disappointing way to say, most likely to say goodbye to Joe Flacco, because he poured his heart into this team. He made it very clear how much he liked being here and how much he loved playing for this city. And it just didn't end the way they wanted it to.
Yeah, I don't think I'm unique in this feeling, but it's the disappointment obviously is in the loss, but it's also just a disappointment with how much fun we were having, right? Like this past month was awesome. Like it was hands down, it was awesome. We were throwing for 300 yards a game. Like Flacco had never even done that in his career. He threw for 4 straight 300-yard games, and we were doing this crazy stuff and scoring a bunch of points, throwing the ball over the field, and it was fun to watch. And like you said, you think that you're happy for Joe. He's going to be on a team next year for sure. But it's like we were talking about this today. It was like maybe this is a good situation for him. Maybe not ours specifically, but one where it's like, hey, we're not going to require you to play 20 games or 15 or 17 games or whatever it may be. Hey, let's be a backup to a guy. And if something happens, you're ready for the stretch run because, Brendan, he was fantastic these last couple of weeks. And, you don't know how a 39-year-old, he's turned 39 on Tuesday, but you don't know how a 39-year-old is going to hold up in the NFL over a course of an entire year. But when he's called upon, that dude can still sling it. And, truthfully, like you said, this is going to sting and hurt. But this last month and a half has been awesome. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, it has. And I certainly anticipate there's a bright future for this team. The reality is I feel like the injuries, in some ways caught up to the Browns. Like even when James Hudson got hurt today, then all of a sudden you look out on the field and you are playing in the playoffs and Leroy Watson and Jerron Christian are your two offensive tackles. Those are offensive tackles 5 and 6 on your depth chart, neither of whom started the season with this team. Like that's a tough blow. And yet this team figured out ways all year long to just not make excuses about what they didn't have. And they figured out how to make what they did have work. And yet on a day like today, where the Browns carried it 20 times for 56 total yards of offense on the ground, my initial thought just goes back to week 2. And there were so many times in this game where I'm like, God, if they could just hand it to Nick Chubb, how this might feel a little different. You can't really play that game with yourself, but I know everybody in this fan base was watching this game today going, man, even if it was just Nick Chubb back, how this might have felt different.
Well, and you think about it, like from this game specifically, like when it got to that track meet feel, like it was like, we're going to be in this thing. Like this is going to be a back and forth, a bunch of points game. Like that's when you hand it to Nick Chubb and you just slow the pace down. Everything relaxes. You get a couple first downs, grind it out, throw the ball to Murray. And it's like, holy cow, you just missed that. And like you think about it, right? This is such a wild season, and there's no reason for a number of different reasons, but there's no reason why you're in the playoffs right now. You turn the ball over a bunch. You got a bunch of dudes. Like imagine if it was Jedrick Wills and Jack Conklin blocking Will Anderson and Jonathan Greenard. That's a different game. It's truthfully a different game. And, it's disappointing from that perspective, but while it's equally disappointing, it is equally impressive that this team was where they were at. And, it was, you kind of were waiting on it. And we saw the dam start to crack a little bit these past couple weeks, and you were like able to hold it together. And then finally tonight, it just blew up and it just wasn't enough as this game kind of wore on.
Let's go to the Cleveland defense here for a moment. CJ Stroud went 16 of 21 for 274, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Davis Mills only threw it one time once he came in, but it just kind of felt like Houston had their way with the Browns defensively. I give them a lot of credit for the way they played up front because their offensive line blocked far better today than it did on Christmas Eve when Cleveland was here. Hanging your hat, I guess, if you're Cleveland, on the growth you saw this year from Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. I think he's got a chance to be a star in this league. He is a fabulous linebacker. And, when you lose Anthony Walker, then you recognize how much of a blow that is. You need somebody to not just step up at that position, but to kind of try and fill Walker's, void in his voice, even more than just his production. And Jeremiah has quickly become one of the most productive, but also most respected players in that locker room. I think Cleveland fans are going to enjoy watching Six play for a long time.
Yeah, that kid's amazing. Some of the plays he even made tonight, and that was kind of going back and forth during the game with my opinion at least, was like, if the Browns can pull this out, it's because of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Because at a point where the Texans were rolling, they had a bunch of big plays back to back. The game was kind of in flux, really, and it was like, hey, it was kind of slipping away from us. Jeremiah was trying to make that thing, trying to just take it back, and he was flying around the football field, and he makes tackles in the backfield. He covers guys in routes. He's just a freaky athlete, and he's the prototypical like new age linebacker where he's a little on the smaller side and he just flies around and he makes tackles. He's physical and he's smart. And that's the biggest thing. He's just a smart player and he's in the right spot at all times. He's fun to watch. And that's a guy where it's like him on every level. You have guys you can build around, right? It's Myles Garrett. And as long as he's going to play, he's your cornerstone on the defensive line. You have a linebacker now with JOK who you can build long-term. And then on the back end, you got Grant Delpit and Denzel Ward and MJ Emerson, where you just build around those guys. You have those foundational pieces, and then you can kind of supplement them with others.
Yeah, and again, we'll try to get into maybe the future of this team along the way in the offseason. This is a little more gut reaction because, there are plenty of reasons to continue to feel good about this group and what they can build on. But you can't help but ask yourself the question today of, like, where do you go from here? Like for as well as this team played, especially in the month of December, rest your starters last week to get as healthy as you possibly can. That's tough. That's a bad result and a really hard way to go into the offseason. It stinks when you lose the last game of the year. You get in the playoffs, like, what the stakes are. You win and you move on, or you lose and you're done. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter if it's the Super Bowl or if it's the wild card round. It stinks to lose, but it is especially disappointing when you have momentum going into the playoffs and just lay an egg like this. And I give Kevin Stefanski a lot of credit for saying, hey, look, Houston played really well. And I kind of get the impression that both staffs, maybe they put a few wrinkles in here and there, but like largely, again, gut reaction, watching Houston play, that's kind of who they were all year. They just did it really, really well today. And watching the Browns play, like that was their identity pretty much all season. They just didn't execute today the way they have. And so the margins of winning and losing in the NFL, man, are razor thin, even when the score looks like that. It wasn't a good result, but again, I thought Cleveland played hard.
It was so like this year as a whole, just thinking about it, it's so odd to me that on the road, this Browns defense and specifically like the secondary just was, frankly horrible on the road. Like they were just bad. You think back to Indianapolis, they were horrible. You think back to tonight, it was awful in the second. Like the places you can point, and I hate like talking in those terms because these guys are athletes. If I went out and played corner, like Nico Collins would run by me in a second, right? But like it's just like they're out there and you're like, man, like Denzel Ward or MJ Emerson, like or Greg Newsome. Greg Newsome got cooked a couple times today, and it was like, what? Like where are we at? What are we doing here? Why are these things happening? We knew that going into this game, everybody knew that their one guy who could beat you is Nico Collins. First 2 drives, he's got 2 chunk plays. It's like, how does that happen in the secondary where you're well coached? You have a great defensive coordinator in Jim Schwartz. You've been playing really good football all year long, and then we come out and we jump on a slant on 3rd down, and all of a sudden Nico Collins is running scot-free down the middle of the field, and you're like, man, where's the disconnect? And why does it always happen on the road? Like, I know that like the dog pound makes a difference at home, but like, where's the disconnect and why is this the case? Because it's really tough. And, the things that haunted us all year long came back to bite us in the tail tonight and was the reason why we lost.
It's a great point. And I guess I would go back and think about like not simply just black and white home and road. Mm-hmm. Was it a certain scheme that teams that typically we just happen to draw them in road games this year? Did we see something repeatedly on the road that was problematic? Kind of quarterback, style of offense, whatever it might be. We'll dive into some of that. Mm-hmm. Look, I also cover Ohio State for Browns fans, and as does Anthony for Browns fans that don't follow our Buckeyes coverage on Fan Nation. We've been saying this for a couple years. CJ Stroud is ridiculous. He's elite. He is among the elite of elite players in this league. And I think the NFL is going to start seeing pretty clearly that this is not a fluke. CJ led the NFL in passing yards this year. He joined Tom Brady and Joe Montana as the only quarterback this year to lead the league in touchdown to interception ratio and in passing yards per game. I don't think this is a flash in the pan. I don't know that Houston is a Super Bowl caliber team, but I know they have a top 5 quarterback in the league right now, and he played like it today against the defense that, again, through 17 games, bar none, the best defense in the NFL, and he just torched the Browns today.
And like I said, too, it was like this perfect marriage for them of like great play calls at the right time and CJ just doing what he's got to do. Drop back. Hey, play action. We're going to move some guys. And then there's going to be a dude wide open. Just give him the football. Like he's fantastic to begin with. And then when guys are running wide open, it's like, hey, my job's super easy. And like you said, his numbers, we'll say him again, 16 to 21, 274, 3 touchdowns. I don't have the full breakdown in front of me, but I don't know that he threw a ball in the 3rd quarter because of the 2 pick sixes, so all of that came in the first half. They were saying is he tied the at least the Texans playoff record of touchdowns in the first half. So it's like he didn't have to do anything in the second half. He did all of that production in the first half. He was spectacular. And you're just, in my head, it's like, I'm just disappointed in the Browns secondary. It's been one of the strengths of this defense all year long. And on the road, they just seem to go to sleep for whatever the reason. And today was example A, prime example number A. I mean, or letter A, I guess, of them falling asleep.
Myles Garrett called it the worst game of his career. He said, this is the most disappointing moment of my professional career. And I can understand why, because he played like the NFL Defensive Player of the Year all year long. And he was largely negated today, just unable to really get it going. An incredibly frustrating way for this season to end for the Cleveland Browns. The final score 45-14 after 35 unanswered points from Houston once the Browns had taken a 14-10 lead early in the second quarter. So the Browns have to figure out what's next, what this thing is going to look like going forward. And frankly, even though they have so many pieces returning next year, it's going to almost feel like a new team from what we just saw today, because theoretically and hopefully all the guys that got hurt are going to get healthy and maybe try to run this thing back again in 2024. Hey, if you joined us throughout the course of the season, we certainly appreciate that. And we got plenty of coverage and plans for you throughout the offseason too. But just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's regularly joined us on our live streams. Kind of a weird year. We took over the site in the middle of the season, and that obviously created a crazy dynamic. It was during the bye week. Had a lot to try to just dive in and start with. Not that we weren't following the team prior to that, but when you try to launch something as full scale as it takes to, put something like this together, it's a lot. And so we tried our best to just put our heads down and create some content for you that hopefully helped connect you to the team. We are really looking forward to what 2024 has to offer, because we can finally come up for air and evaluate some of the things that we liked and didn't like, and promise you we'll put together a really comprehensive game plan to cover this team moving forward.
Yeah, no, I'll reiterate that before we close it out. It's been, it stinks the way this ends, but for one team, it ends in a win. For the rest of the other 31 teams, it ends in a loss. And it's been a heck of a year. It's been a ton of fun. Love everyone who's been following along, and we're excited to continue to grow this. And next year when we come back, well, all off season, and then next year when we kick this thing off, we're gonna have a great show for you. So we appreciate it, and looking forward to 2024.
It'll be great. For Anthony Moeglin, I'm Brendan Gulick. All the latest news and info on the Cleveland Browns, we got you covered over on BrownsDigest.com.